So I'm Dr. Josephine Dolan. That's the name I publish under, but face to face, I'm Josie. Now, the reason for the Josephine, using Josephine in public, is because my mum asked me to. I currently work on cinema and ageing with special interest in stardom, but my background is women's studies, so I come at everything from a feminist perspective. That's where I come from. I'm also grounded in British cultural studies, so my interest in questions around representation, for interest, come via Stuart Hall and his work on race, his work on the whole semiotic system and that circuit of culture that he writes about so beautifully. So that's the broadest background. Although I would never assume biology and the impact of the body, I think most of the identity categories we talk about are culturally produced. So particularly for me, it's a real issue at the moment because look at me, I am an ageing woman. And I actually do adopt the banner old age. I'm retired, I'm in my 70s. I consider myself to be an old woman as an act of politics in the same way that the gay rights activists, black rights activists seize those names that were previously pejorative and rework them as a badge of pride. I am very proud to be old because I am the product of the British welfare system. And I say this in my book, where I grew up, there were no old people, neither chronologically nor in terms of anything else. I'm from a very impoverished working class background, and most people did not reach the age of 65. Most people did not retire. They were worn out much early, at a much earlier age. Is that the background?
I mean, you've already touched upon the question of old age. How did you personally get to the topic of old age? Because that seems to be a lot of people, state that it's because they themselves are aging. But what are the sort of scholarly approaches that brought you to this topic?
Mine wasn't even a scholarly approach. I love to tell this story. I went with a group of friends to watch Calendar Girls.
Oh yes, marvelous movie.
Yes. Marvellous movie, absolutely fun, loved it. Mm-hmm. But when I started reading the critical reviews around it, there was so much about these brave actresses who'd exposed their bodies and the brave women on the original calendar who at their age had exposed their bodies. At this point, I was roughly the same age at this time, and I started looking at my body and thinking, well, what's wrong with it? It still works, it functions. Mm-hmm. There's nothing particularly abject about this. So there's that whole regulation of the ageing female body that became of interest. And I did not know where to start. I have a memory of going to a conference to present a paper on Calendar Girls. It's supposed to be about ageing, but I ended up talking about class because I didn't know how to write about ageing. I had to confess, at this conference, the reason I wasn't talking about ageing was I didn't know where to start. I went public with my ignorance. Mm-hmm. So, as a result of that, I then organised a conference. I thought, what's the quickest way of getting to hear what's being said? So I organised the Ageing Femininities conference, which then led to the book that I co-edited with the Stella Tinknell. And it was like the best Christmas present I've ever had in my life. Scholars from Europe and Canada arrived at my university, and it's not the University of Bristol, it was the University of West of England, which is not a prestigious university. Let's not pretend it has a high research programme. But these scholars came, and they brought their knowledge, they brought what they knew, and they shared with such generosity. And it was, apart from being the best Christmas present intellectually, after many, many years, I finally found my intellectual home. I found the people I wanted to be with, the generous scholars, the scholars who don't want to score points off you. Mm-hmm. really want to say, oh, let me tell you about this, let's share this with you. And it was amazing. And since then, I've been on this incredible journey. In terms of aging studies, I have, of course, Sally Chivers is my go-to scholar. If I think, oh, has anybody said, of course, you go to Sally Chivers, The Silvering Screen, of course somebody said it already, because Sally Chivers said it first, you know.
Yeah.
I go to Pamela Ravan. Her introduction to age theory should be compulsory reading for anybody entering the field. It's so thorough, so well worked through. So they're my two go-to. Of course, there are people like Barbara Marshall writing from a sociological perspective about ageing, Stephen Katz on the history of senescence, Margaret Goulet, you can't not mention. So there are these go-to people, and of course, Cathy Woodward, who once I discovered this whole body, found out she was writing this stuff 20 years ago.
Yeah.
She started the ball rolling when nobody else was even thinking about it within the humanities. I know the social sciences were doing it, I know sociology was doing it, but in my field of humanities, ageing had not entered the agenda. So it's been amazing. And I love to think that the so-called declining years of my academic career have actually been the most productive, the most wonderful, the most exciting, the most innovative. So that's one theory of decline, booted out of the window.
Yes. Because you obviously mentioned the silvering of the screen, and you've mentioned Calendar Girls, where we're basically right at the point where I actually wanted to go, and we did so very smoothly, or you did so very smoothly, basically. So, and of course, I've just mentioned, Kathleen Woodward, who says that we live in a society that is sort of permeated with images, and that we have a very visual culture in a way. So now you're, of course, working a lot on film and on visual culture and on stardom and celebrities. So why should we study film? Why should we study celebrities and stars? Because they are often, there's the criticism leveled at it that stars and celebrities, that's always very superficial. But what can these pillars or these ideals that they represent help us when it comes to older age?
Well, I think not just older age, but any identity formation that we can accept as being culturally produced. Always have to ask ourselves, well, how do these ideas saturate our society to such an extent that they seem natural? I'm always interested in the idea that this has been naturalised. It's so much part of common sense that it's placed beyond question. And people grasp that more readily with race. I mean, to think about let's think about the Me Too campaign. Let's think about Stay With Women for a moment. The very fact that it was taken for granted within the film industry that powerful men could ask sexual favours of women they wanted to give a job to. And it was so embedded within the society, nobody questioned it. It took, once one person did, the whole movement followed on. So it's that kind of idea that interests me. And it permeates society to such an extent. Now, that's one small part of an industry, but films and other forms of popular culture are where we can recognise what is taken as common sense, what Gramsci would call hegemonic, that is so permeating everyday life that it's placed beyond question. And certain ideas, once I'd started thinking about Calendar Girls, I became obsessed with stardom, female stardom and celebrity and the pressure of rejuvenation. Why older women are always being pressurized to rejuvenate, whether it's through skin creams, through Botox, or more radically through surgery of some kind. That kind of pressure. And the idea that women should remain looking young, whatever that means. I mean, that's never questioned. What does it mean to look young? Why should you want to look young? What's wrong with looking old? These are the questions I started asking myself as part of my lived experience. And I became increasingly aware that people thought it was a supreme compliment to tell me I didn't look my age.
Mm-hmm.
But they still do it. Oh God, you don't look your age. And I say, but I am 65, I am 70, I am 72. That's my age. This is what I look like. Therefore, I look like my age. There is this widespread, and it's an ideological belief, A, that women want to look young or younger than they are, and B, that somehow it's a sign of success to achieve that. And it saturates the whole movie industry in all sorts of ways. And that was the way I came into it. And I started writing about rejuvenation. And there are the Jane Fondas of the world and the Madonnas of the world who are completely open about their plastic surgery, the work they've had done, what they see as improvements. Then there are the ones who claim not to have had it done. I mean, and Nicole Kidman fascinates me. That strangely immovable face.
Yeah.
It's had no work done on it.
No, of course she hasn't.
Yeah, of course she hasn't. There are all of those things. So those things interest me. Also the use of lighting, makeup technologies to make the on-screen appearance of older women look far younger. I remember once seeing Helen Mirren not long after the Calendar Girls and the Senior Sexy Woman image that was promulgated at that time. Seen her on a morning breakfast magazine show in the UK, and she looked fabulous, beautifully dressed, hair immaculate, but she was full of wrinkles because she'd not had the makeup done to eradicate them, and she was glowing and she looked amazing. So she didn't look like the Helen Mirren of the movie screen. She looked like a different Helen Mirren. So I was fascinated by that whole prosthetic of youth, of youthful appearance that permeates the film industry, and the ideological work behind that. And the extent to which it is a regulatory regime of femininity, and all your students will be familiar with the discourses that older women should never dress mutton's lamb. You shouldn't be too young for your age, but you shouldn't be frumpy either because you've got to successfully age. You've got to age in a way that suggests that you're still healthy and vibrant and a productive member of the community. So for older women, walking that tension, and I am not pretending that I'm outside that. I am as ideological. I've not found that ivory tower where I can be beyond. I am embedded in the culture as much as everybody else. So it's my lived experience trying to negotiate those twin perils, and also being academically aware, standing in or online shops as it is at the moment under COVID, choosing my new garments, thinking, is that too young? Will that make me look frumpy? Can I get away with that? At my age, can I still get away with that? So there's that whole awareness of being part of that. And the reason to study stardom and celebrity in film is to see those kinds of discourses at work, to see them being iterated and reiterated in a way that is so taken for granted, you can actually see it as an ideological underpinning of how to do femininity as you grow older. But I would come back to the broader indications of studying film and television particularly, that there's always been this assumption that only trivial, ridiculous, silly people choose to watch film or choose to watch television, when in fact these things are very, very carefully constructed, and they're as carefully written and put together as the most highbrow novel that you can think about. And it's been so easy for elitism of all kinds, whether it's class elitism or gender elitism or even racial elitism, to trivialise forms of popular culture that the masses consume, and to keep the ivory tower of superior knowledge, superior taste, all of that shored up by demeaning other forms of popular culture.
Yeah.
So That's another reason to study. It's actually an anti-elitist movement that has roots, once again, in feminism, to claim back from the elitist discourse, popular culture. So, they're the twofold strands to answering your question.
I just had to think of the first reactions I got when I started to study television, and everyone's just like, but so you're watching television all day, and it's much more than that, especially because things like sitcoms, the moment comedy comes into that entire mix, it's even more trivialized, and people just kind of think it's not worth investigating. And then again, it is. I've noticed that, especially with regards to age, when it because I recently watched Waiting for God for my PhD. And it's a fabulous series, and it's great fun. But the background, the ideological workings of that series are very, very interesting, because they paint very different pictures of femininity, of masculinity, of later life than, for instance, other films of that time do. That sort of underscored that it is quite important to have a look at that. When it comes to age and film and television, so that there is this pervasive idea that since the 90s, there has been this influx of older people on screen, but also older people consuming film and television. And I think you write that in your book when you say that, I think you're quoting a headline and saying that the market in grey, or basically the older generation, is saving the cinemas and saving the screens. Which I find quite interesting, because that kind of goes into the same direction, that older people, older adults, are actually really vital when it comes to not when it comes to later life, obviously when it comes to later life, but when it comes to the film and television industry. Do you see that trend actually in your work during your research? Has there been an influx of later life or of older adults on screen?
I'll begin with audiences. And there is statistical evidence to say that there are more and more older people going to the cinema, preferring the cinema to, say, streaming, taking their film culture through attending the cinema. The reasons are a multitude. Let's face it, younger people who are perhaps on low incomes, maybe still students or on a very, very poorly paid job, waiting to get their start on a career, actually can't afford the cinema. It's expensive. For older, one of the perks of being older is you get concessions at the cinema. So you can go during the afternoon when everybody else is at work and watch a really film for half price. So that's one of the reasons that the exhibition section of the cinema industry has actually courted older people and encouraged them to go along. And I think it's worth stressing the nature of the film industry, that the exhibition sector is separate from the production sector. So, where films are shown, they've courted older people. And another one of the things was the introduction of family film, because of the certification of different age groups for different kinds of films. The whole idea of the family film, the Shreks and the Disney films, the Harry Potter series, whereby whole families would go together. Well, that became, and I know this from my own experience, it became a thing I did with my grandchildren. We had that lovely intergenerational exchange in the cinema. We were both getting concessions. I was getting the old person, they were getting the young person, So that's one of the reasons, why it was the exhibition centre actually courted the older generation. But that's set against tailing off of the tendencies more broadly, because more and more people are streaming, watching on different kinds of screens, not necessarily going to the cinema. But what those headlines that scream, the silver-haired screen goer is saving the cinema, they actually mean cinema buildings. They actually mean the theatre of cinema, not necessarily the film industry, because the film industry is under no threat. People are watching more and more films. In terms of older people, and again, representations of older people on screen, there has been a marked shift in that since roughly around about 2000, at the moment that more and more older people are going to the cinema, there did become far more films made with older protagonists. And that was the crucial difference. If you know the Sherry McVitie fabulous book, The Fade to Grey, which maps a whole 100 years of older people in American cinema, they again and again make the point that yes, there were always older people in films, but they were never driving the story. They were always the incidental character that highlighted the concerns of a younger protagonist. And round about 2000, there came to be this cycle of films within different genres with the older protagonists. Basic conventional genre films were reworked in order to accommodate the older protagonist. And they really caught on. And they're popular across the age groups as well. So very, very young people will go and watch Schwarzenegger and in those older action movies in just the same way that they watch the younger Schwarzenegger. Young women will go and watch The Marigold Hotel, or the Mamma Mia phenomenon is something else altogether. So it has created this market that is partly appealing to older audiences, but drawing in younger audiences. And I think often it's the non-realist dimension of these films that give the greatest pleasure. It's the spectacle of the older body performing these amazing feats that is part and parcel of the thing. And it's been an amazing period to live through, because it has been. I wouldn't say it's transformed, because if you actually look at the cohort of stars, they've not changed in the best part of 25 years now. If this phenomenon began around about 2000, we're still seeing the same stars. I mean, sadly, Christopher Plummer, who's always been one of my favourites, has died just recently. But he was a fabulous, really great age, a great chronological age, a really good example of an actor who was able to keep working right to the end. But he's not been replaced with a younger actor yet. Who's going to come in at the other end as the older man? And I can't wait to watch, I thought it was really interesting when Richard Gere popped up in the second best Marigold Hotel. But, Gere's been rewritten as an older man.
Absolutely.
Lots of things that are happening. So this continual change. But it's fascinating to watch it, and it's not necessarily progress. That's the other thing. It's because what the stars do is so limited by the genre conventions. If it's a romantic genre, it's Diane Keaton's got to fall in love with Jack Nicholson, whoever the leading man is. And even in the Marigold Hotel, it had to be Judi Dench and Bill Nye getting together at the end of the second one. That convention is so part and parcel of it, and also, I must confess, one of the satisfactions, because I am a lover of genre film.
I mean, it's a nice wrap-up. Yeah, Marigold Hotel is a lovely wrap-up at the end, because you follow these characters, and it's just very nice to have them end up together. Do you think that has maybe a bit to do with seeing actors age on screen? Because we've seen Judi Dench basically since forever, and especially after she became very famous for her role as M. And since then, she's been playing a couple of roles, sometimes branching out into that role of the older female, but mostly we've just seen her age on screen. Do you think that helps us to sort of have more older protagonists on film or on screens?
That's a good question. I've never given that any particular thought. It certainly helps audiences accept increasingly chronologically aged figures, and I stress chronologically aged. I think it helps that way. And seeing Diane Keaton age has been fascinating. Watching her age on screen, watching that happen is fascinating itself. So I think there is a greater acceptance of older protagonists in a range of genres across film and television. But whether it answers the question, does it help older actors to get work, is a different question altogether. Because I say we've had the same cohort for the best of 25 years. It's not created work for another cohort. One of the things I had, and it was for the Journal of British Cinema and Television, I did an interview with a woman called Jean Rogers, who had a very minor part in a British daytime soap called Emmerdale, it was Emmerdale Farm in the place that she used to be in it. But she's been the vice chair of the Equity, the Actors Union, for the best part of 30 years. And she's been an activist in 30 years for that time. And she said, it's wonderful to see the Helen Mirrens and the Judi Denchs getting work into their old age and so on and so forth. But they're only a handful. The majority of actresses are still redundant once they reach a certain age. They can't get the parts because the roles are not written for older women. They might be written for Helen Mirren, it might be written for Judi Dench, but it's not written for an older woman who might not have had a big part. So there is a real serious concern and one that I share, that the hypervisibility of a handful of particular stars is actually of the near hiding a much more invidious trend underneath, whereby the same politics off-screen, ageist politics are happening, whereby casting, script writers, directors don't see the potential for older women or older men even to play those parts. So I think we've got to be very careful in thinking along those lines.
I think you can also see that in part with those big film actors suddenly branching out into television. One of the examples that just came to my mind is John Cleese, who's been first he was just going for film and of course television in the 70s and 80s, but now suddenly as an older actor he's much more prominent in, for instance, Hold the Sunset. So I feel that you have this sort of merging of television and film where you have the same actors all the time and you just can't have any others.
Right, yes, yeah. There are, I'm sure you're familiar with Last Tango in Halifax.
Yeah, with Derek Jacobi.
Yeah. And her name's gone, the older, she's always been a television actor. She's fabulous. And I remember her as a young woman in the very, very first episode ever of Coronation Street. Yeah. And she really has aged on screen, and she's such a good actress, and she's done comedy, and she's done that. But I assume she's never been offered a film role because she's not got the right look. Whereas Derek Jacobi's always managed that moving between film, theatre, and television. That sort of exemplifies one of the things that struck me about that series started off as being about the older couple. Now it's about the lives of the younger couple, and the older couple have got written out. So again, even though the two oldest characters have got the prime role, it's about them. It's about their last tango. But yes, you're absolutely right about that blurring of the opportunities between television and the cinema screen for the same cohorts of actors. Ian McKellen's in everything.
Yeah, Ian McKellen and Derek Jacobi are suddenly in everything.
Yeah, I think there's a very, very rich scene of TV in ways there isn't a rich scene of cinema. I think TV has always been more willing to have older protagonists, important characters in its dramas of all kinds, simply because of the edicts of realism. You know, if you run something that's purporting to be a realistic representation of the world, you've got to have older people in it. So there's always been really good older characters, always been really good, strong older women. You know, no narrative of decline. Most soaps, if you think the older characters in soaps, then never in a decline. They're always in there fighting the corner. You know, I enjoy soaps so much because of that. I love the older characters. You know, they're alive. You know, they're alive. They're living. You never get anything comparable with cinema, particularly when it's made in Hollywood. But even most British cinema, because of the nature of the film industry, because the British cinema is always beholden to an American distribution company. I mean, the same for European cinema, but there's less pressure because of the language as well makes a difference. You know, when something's written in German or French, it's it makes it harder to sell in the US, but less obviously a US product in ways that British film, it's very hard to tease out there. Where is it British and where is it a US production? Where does one end and where's the other? But they're the kind of interesting tensions that work across the industry. Because I'm always fascinated by the very idea that a film or a television series or drama is an industrial product as well. But there's a whole industry behind it, and so how you can get to the screen in the first place.
And because we're at it, you write about the silvering of the screen and a silver industry. Now that sounds really fancy, but apart from having older actors on screen and older protagonists, what is the silvering of the film industry?
Well, the film industry is all, the idea, let's just think about the silver screen. Okay, it's a description of the screen itself. It's also about the money, the lucrative money that gets made, the economics of the film industry. Without economics, we would not have a film industry. Film is a commodity to be bought and sold. I think it's really interesting. Michael Channon wrote a really interesting article, the name of which escapes me now, about the commodification of the film, that the entrance fee, that people were willing to pay an entrance fee to go and see a film. And that was such a new concept, because when film was first invented, it was a novelty that was shown at fun fairs and music hall. And then suddenly it became this thing that had to have a dedicated theatre that became a night out, and you paid to go and see it. And you paid to see it. You didn't get a product. You didn't get anything in your hand to take home.
Yeah.
You paid for the privilege of watching something and consuming it in that sense. So always, the film industry is driven by economics. So for me, the silvering of stardom, and that's what fascinates me as the silvering of stardom, is the dynamic between older actors and protagonists and the profits of the film industry. But for me, cinema is never, ever a discrete medium, simply because of stars. Stars have off-screen existences. People follow stars. People are influencing their buying habits by stars. I've done it myself. I've seen a dress on screen. Oh, where can I get that? Can I get my hair cut like that? So consumerism follows cinema in ways, and it's been a part and parcel of cinema since its earliest days. Charles Eckert has written about the extent to which cinema buildings are placed in close proximity to consumer outlets. Shopping city centres. I can remember as a child queuing to go into a cinema in the high streets in my local town, with the shops all along there. And the dresses that were similar to the dresses on the screen were in the shop windows. But all of that dynamic has been there. Cinema creates desire for consumer products. It might be a fridge, might be a multi-car, might be a watch.
That was my thought. It's the product placement and James Bond.
Yeah, so some of it's obvious, but just the dress style. So one of the more famous was in Pretty Woman, the Julia Roberts dress was copied. It's washed out to high streets. These fashions. And often the on-screen version is haute couture by a leading designer, and then it's mass marketed. It's cut and mass marketed for the thing. Charlotte Herzog writes about this, and the Eckert article I mentioned, and this Charlotte Herzog are in the Christine Gledhill edited collection, Star and Industry of Desire, and the ways in which both of those writers map the journey of something that was designed as a one-off for a star into the high street and the mass market is fascinating. And think of the ways in which premiere or an Oscars, the dresses that the stars wear, or what kind of evening wear the men wear, because dinner jackets change. Men always wear dinner jackets, but they change over the years. The cut changes. The kind of tie they wear changes. All that is leading the fashion. You know, I'm not susceptible to all of that. But suddenly 2 years down the line, I'm wearing something that looked surprisingly like that thing, you know. So so it's that kind of permeability between on-screen and off-screen that is negotiated by stars that fascinates me. Sometimes it's overt endorsement. A star will endorse a project. I mean, if we're thinking about the women stars, because you're worth it, you're worth it. The whole beauty industry around that, you know, the ways female stars endorse all manner of beauty products, or hair colourings, you know, the L'Oreal hair colourings. You know, there's a whole range of beauty products. But male stars endorse whiskies and vodkas. Used to be cigarettes, you know. I mean, one of the things that points I make in the book that the Du Maurier cigarettes were named after a famous stage actor, you know, as an endorsement. So they're more overt ones, you know, where a star gets very, very well paid. Thank you very much. I write about the Nintendo age games in the book. You know, Nicole Kidman, for instance, endorsing you know, these games to help you keep your brain younger. So that's the much more overt. But then there's the covert, which is the product placement, and that transition from the big screen to our everyday lives without us even realising it. The way it goes from the big screen and becomes a trend in the high streets. When I was writing, I loved going online at the sort of bloggers and the kinds of internet world that was telling us what trends they were. Those who will give you a picture of a star and what they're wearing, and then tell you where you can buy something like it in the shops. And there'll be the high-end shop and the H&M version, you know, that kind of thing. So I got fascinated by all of that. And it's not new, it's always happened. I mean, Jackie Stacey in Stargazing wrote about what happened with women in the 1940s and how they were influenced through the magazines they were reading. You know, what cardigan he had, whether he had a string of pearls, you know, or whether he had a double loop of string of pearls, you know, depending on your favourite star. So there's a whole range of things. So none of it's new. That's the thing. None of it's new. The film industry has always silvered. As it silvered its own coffers, it silvered the coffers of the consumer industry. But what it's done in the last 20 years is to recruit ageing stars in a new way, in recognition that the ageing market, the silver pound, the silver euro, the silver dollar, that are all now, because actually old consumers have often got more.
Where do you see the advantage in that? Consumers. I mean, of course, you know, the disadvantages, I don't want to call them obvious, but they seem more obvious than maybe the advantages that such a commodification of the film industry might have.
The advantage is always profit. Straightforward, Marxist answer. It's always about capitalism. It's always and ever. If there were no profits, there would be no films made, or they would all be low-budget independent films done on a shoestring. But the kinds of films we're talking about here, and the kind of television programs, if there is no profit, there would be no industry. And which is one of the reasons why stars are so carefully protected, because of course, more than anything, a star can bankroll a film. If somebody goes to a film industry, a director, an executive director, looking for funding for an idea, the first question is, who's the star? Will they bring the audience in? Which is one of the reasons why the cohorts don't change that much, because they know exactly who is.
They know Ian McKellen is bankable.
You know. So Judi Dench is bankable. You know, but equally at the same time, directors like certain stars because they know they're reliable. They will turn up on time. They will have read their lines. They will know what they're doing that day. You know, I mean, I write about Mickey Rourke, who's the eternal bad boy of the film industry, who's been busted off more films than anything else, because he doesn't turn up on time. He does drugs, he gets drunk, he gets into fights. You know, that's his that's actually his star image, is the bad boy. So, which also makes him bankable, because people love the bad boy. So you get this strange dichotomy. And interesting, he's another movie star that's been part of the youth. There are endless web articles about how good he's looking, how fit he's looking, how clean he is at the moment, how he's had plastic surgery, not to rejuvenate, but to correct the consequences of a boxing career and endless barroom brawls. Reconstructive surgery, rejuvenatory surgery. It's an interesting example of the gendering.
If he were a woman, then it would be
Hollywood.
rejuvenating for rejuvenation purposes and not so much for reconstruction.
So, if he was a woman, he would not have a career, because women who women don't get into brawls. Women who turned up with their lost
I think
slots
that was one of the
would never
problems
get
that
into the film.
Renée Zellweger had a couple of years ago, because she had plastic surgery and she looked very different from what people were sort of familiar with, and she had a lot of trouble getting into new films because people just didn't really recognize her any longer from her Bridget Jones times.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, and the whole story, the whole discourse around plastic surgery gone wrong, you know, I'm sure your students have, we've all read them. Let's not pretend, you can't escape. You use the internet at all, they're always popping up. But there's something embarrassingly pleasurable about reading these things, because it's incredibly voyeuristic and you don't wish anybody harm. But I do. To my eternal shame, always have the little voice that says, "Oh, it serves you right," you know. Dare I admit that in public? Yeah. But yeah, you know. So you know, the endless cautions. So it fascinates me that on the one hand, there is this endless mediated pressure that's circulating around, that nobody seems to own, but is endlessly being reproduced, that women and men need to rejuvenate in different ways, in gendered ways, but they need to rejuvenate, but only in the right way, because if it goes wrong, then you become the
usually it
object
needs
of
to be
trolling.
unrecognizable that you've had that surgery.
So, well, it needs to be recognisable that you look better or younger, or refreshed, I think the phrase, refreshed. Oh yeah, but not to the extent that you look so different or changed. So it is quite a complicated picture around, if we start thinking about stardom and successful aging. Rejuvenation as successful aging is what happens a lot with stardom. It gets reduced to looking young rather than being.
Do you think that the film industry in a way perpetuates this idea to a larger extent than other forms of media, that we need to not so much, stay active, stay fit? That is something that advertisements do quite often, but that the film industry just kind of tells us to be wrinkle-free, or if not wrinkle-free, then at least fewer wrinkles than you would have.
I would say the film industry in collusion with the cosmetics industry. The two are so hand in hand. And I think that there is a blur in health and cosmetic surgery at the moment. I find it fascinating that when I go to my dentist these days, not only do they offer me corrective treatment for my teeth, I can get my face fixed at the dentist now. I can get my wrinkles eradicated. There are all sorts of treatments that I can get at my dentist now, which is amazing. I know, and it's because they've got certain qualifications in administering hypodermic treatments. They have access to anaesthetics. They have small surgical surgeries, operating surgery in theatres, in dentist surgeries. So there's that side. So from going to getting your teeth done and Hollywoodized and the enamelized white, shiny white, whiter than white teeth, there is an easy slide into getting all sorts of face treatments. So, I do hold Hollywood highly responsible. And the logic of that, I mean, I don't agree with rejuvenation in that sense, or the logic that anybody can look their age. Because we all look different age. What does it mean to look 60? What does it look mean to 12? Whose body are we talking about here? And of course, Hollywood particularly is only ever talking about white bodies. Not African American, not Asian, not Eastern, Chinese or Thai or Pakistan or Indian or African or Afro-Caribbean. It's always a white body. The white body is so normalised within Hollywood that it's incredibly disturbing. So in a way, it doesn't really matter if you're black and old. It doesn't matter what you look like. It's an imperative of whiteness. The whiteness and looking young have become linked in a very disturbing and troubling way. It troubles me that illusion of the two.
I think especially when it comes to BAME individuals or to people of color, that you find rarely any portrayals, and if you find portrayals, then it's never as a protagonist. Even in Marigold Hotel, I think the owner's mother is about the same age as the residents, potentially, or a little younger. I find it very strange that it's really hard, especially when you're looking for film clips, it's really hard to find movies with BAME individual protagonists that are aging. They're usually sidelined a lot, and they're like not so much the gay best friend, but the older, either the wise men, especially when it comes to Southeast Asian and Asian depictions, or you have the black friend or the angry black woman, or even worse, you have those grotesque portrayals of aging femininity that also go together with race and ethnicity. I've been trying to find films, and it's really hard because at first I thought, Marigold Hotel, it's set in India. There must be some older people there. And there are basically two that are actually focused on and have a speaking role, even if it's just a minor speaking role.
I mean, that's just such a post-colonial or a neo-colonial film.
Yeah, it is.
The legitimation of the third world caring for the West's older people. The idea of work that film absolutely appalls me. I get more horrified by that film. Every time I watch it, I get more and more horrified.
Yeah, same here. The first time I thought, that's a feel-good movie. That's nice. And now that I'm actually far longer working on age, it's not so nice any longer.
But it's so spectacularly beautiful. Yep. And that's one of the problems of cinematic spectacle, is that you become absorbed in the spectacle of the beauty of a film. I know exactly what you mean about finding really interesting BAME characters. Yep. Even an interesting older character, even if they were not the protagonist, it would be something, but they're just not there.
I know. It's a lot of typecasting, I feel. It's basically the old wise wizard, and then there is a lot of nothing following after that.
And even like Denzel Washington, who had really long careers, but always a sidekick.
I think the only one who is actually allowed to age, because he seems to not age at all, is Samuel L. Jackson. He is one of the few ones that is still around, and I recently just realized that he's like over 70, I believe, and I was surprised.
Yeah, but also again, he's rarely the protagonist. He's often the sidekick to the white protagonist.
And he's even more typecast, especially since his Avenger movies that he's been a part of.
Oh yes, I know.
Yeah. Also, he's never portrayed as an older person. His age is never mentioned. He could be anything between 40 and 70, and no one would notice. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And he's not allowed to age in any way. He doesn't even do the thing that age and masculinity always does in film, which complains about the creaking body that's breaking down, which is a trope right across a whole range of genres. male product is always my back, my knees, and this, that, and the other, and then they get into a fight and win the day.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't believe they still could, but turns out they can.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Because they're all and wiser now.
Exactly.
And they've got a few tricks up that those young, there's a lot to worry about with the. So I think that's an interesting point, because despite the seeming growth in films with aging protagonists, we need to be very wary about the kind of protagonists we're getting and the kind of representation of old age, whatever old age means, however we define it, the kinds of representations we're getting, because they're deeply troubling most of the time.
I find that is a fantastic last word.
First of all, thank you for the invitation as well. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk about my work.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful to know that it's my work, however valuable or invaluable it is actually being introduced to another cohort of students. So thank you.
Absolutely. So officially, thank you very much for your time. It was lovely to chat to you.